words, just like in England versus America, we have different pronunciations of English. Similarly, the Arabian tribes had different pronunciations. And sometimes they even had synonymous words that were changed. Because as I said, the Arabic tribal dialects were much more different than modern English is. And so sometimes a certain word would not be used by the Quraysh, but might be used by the Yemeni tribes. So the Prophet ﷺ would recite them with that word in the Yemeni dialect, not in the Qurayshi dialect. So sometimes a synonym would be used, very rarely. But there are recorded instances where a different synonym would be used. Now, so these are the 7 ahruf. They're exactly 7 ahruf that Allah Azza wa Jal allowed the Qur'an to be recited in, based upon the dialects, the famous 7 dialects of the Arabian Peninsula. Now, when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, the Sahaba understood these differences, and they went to their various lands and respective regions and continued to recite the way that they had been taught, each one as the Prophet ﷺ had taught him. But many of the younger people, not the companions, the students of the companions, were unaware of these differences. And we mentioned in a previous episode that some of these different younger students met up, for example, in Azerbaijan, on the Muslim battlefield, the front lines of the Muslim border. And one of them is reciting according to Ibn Mas'ud, the other one is reciting according to Zayd ibn Thabit, and they don't know that the Qur'an has been revealed in different recitations. And so they began fighting one another. They began accusing the other one of falling into error. And that is why Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman went back to Medina, and he said, "O Uthman ibn Affan, you have to combine the ummah on one mushaf, on one recitation, such that all of these other differences are gotten rid of." And so Uthman ibn Affan combined the ummah upon the recitation of the Qurayshi dialect. It was the Qurayshi dialect, and all of the other recitations and versions were gotten rid of. However, even though these other versions were gotten rid of, certain elements were left, much more trivial than the actual differences in the ahruf. And these elements primarily resolved upon pronunciation of the letters. Why? Because Uthman ibn Affan preserved the writing of the Qurayshi dialect. And so all of the synonyms that were used, that were in other dialects, were gotten away with. But still, the writing can be read in different ways. If I send you a letter and you are in a certain part of the world, you will read the English in a certain way. And if I send it in another part of the world, the people in that region will read it in a different way. And this is all a part of the English language. And it is something that every language has. And so the people would recite certain words. It's the same word, but they would recite it in different pronunciations. Sometimes there will be differences in harakat as well. And these differences were based upon how the Prophet ﷺ taught the various tribes. And these differences began to be recorded by later scholars. And these differences were then ascribed to the people who became famous for them. So these differences were named after specific people. And these people were the ones who became famous for their particular recitation. Until finally, the codification of these recitations occurred, and this was done in the 2nd and 3rd century of the Hijrah, and these recitations are known in Arabic as the qira'at. The qira'at are not the same as the 7 ahruf. I'll give you a very simple analogy here, which will help you understand what the difference is between the ahruf and the qira'at. The ahruf are what Allah Azza wa Jal revealed divinely. If you jumble up all the ahruf together, and then you spread them and let every person recite according to one of these recitations, according to some mixture of these recitations, these become the qira'at. And the qira'at are named after specific people who specialized in them. And finally, as we said, in the 2nd and 3rd century of the Hijrah, these qira'at were standardized. They were codified. And exactly 10 qira'at were chosen by our Muslim scholars. 10 of them were chosen because they represented the cream of the crop. They represented the best of the best. In each city, primarily 1 or 2 major qadis were chosen. So, for example, in the city of Medina, there was the most famous qadi, and his name was Nafi'. And Nafi' was chosen to represent Medina. And in Mecca, there was a famous qadi by the name of Ibn Kathir. Don't get confused with the one who wrote the tafsir. The one who wrote the tafsir lived 500 years later. This is another Ibn Kathir. And so Ibn Kathir al-Makki became another qira'ah. Likewise in Basra and in Kufa and in other places, every one of these places, they standardized certain scholars to become the leaders of the qira'at. And to this day, these qira'at are present in the ummah. Now for the most of us, we have no idea of these qira'at because we all live in an area or region where one qira'ah is recited. But if you go to other cities or you go to other countries, in particular, for example, North Africa. North Africa has a different type of qira'ah, and it is called the qira'ah of Nafi', which is the qira'ah of Medina. Most of the world has the qira'ah of the people of Iraq, which is Hafs and Asim al-Kufi, the people of Kufa. And this is what I assume most of my viewership will also know. They will be familiar with the recitation of Hafs and Asim, and this is the recitation that is prevalent in over 90% of the Muslim ummah. So the point of this halaqah, to summarize, is that there are certain divinely revealed differences in the Quranic recitation which vary very, very slightly. The variance is extremely minute, and these variances are memorized in specialized institutions known as the schools of the qira'at. The average Muslim is not exposed to them, he is not aware of them, but it is something that one should be aware of if one is an educated Muslim. And if you ask around in your locality, I am sure you will find people who have memorized more than one qira'at, and you can get more information from them and get also specific details of the differences of these qira'at. This brings us to the conclusion of today's episode. Insha'Allah ta'ala, we will continue our fascinating journey talking about the sciences of the Qur'an in our next episode. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
الله نزل أحسن الحديث كتابا متشابها مثانية تقشعر منه جلود الذين يخشون ربهم ثم تلين جلودهم وقلوبهم إلى ذكر الله